Okay, well, hello everyone. It was great to meet you. Um, I am going to be presenting some of my thoughts on teaching English in the ENGin program today. I've been with this program for about 6 months as a volunteer, and then more recently I've gotten involved a little bit more in developing some of the instructional materials as well. Okay, so I think we could go to the next slide. All right, so let me first tell you a little bit about myself. I'm a partially retired college professor, so I've had more than 30 years of experience as an educator, not in the area of languages, but in the area of economics, actually. But languages have always been, to some degree, a hobby of mine. And more recently, having a little bit more time on my hands, I decided about 18 months ago I had already spoken Spanish, but I decided to take on learning French and to see if that would even be possible at my advanced age. um, and and to do it completely online using online tools. And um, and so I actually had a very successful experience with that. I've now moved on and I'm starting to learn German online. But I started thinking that, maybe my struggles with learning languages could be put to good use in something like this program, starting to help um, people in other countries learning English. And certainly I've had my struggles with learning to speak. But one of the things I did this time around learning French was really to focus on the spoken language. So from day one, I was really intent on learning to not just read, write, but to speak the language. And then, of course, I developed a real interest in the pedagogy of language learning. How do we learn to speak a language? So let's advance the slide, and I'll tell you a few of my initial thoughts. Of course, there's this wide perception that children are the best language learners because of their natural, quote unquote, natural abilities, whatever that means. And then the idea of this diminishing with age. And while I think it may be true that children may acquire language a little bit more easily than adults, I certainly believe that adults can acquire a very high degree of competency in spoken language in another language. And but children actually benefit from a few situational aspects, I think, that maximize their ability to acquire spoken language so well. So let's go to the next slide and talk about those. Well, the first being, of course, motivation. And if you've ever been around children, you know that they have a really strong peer pressure. They want to fit in with the other kids. So if you take a child who's learned their own native language, put them in a new environment, they will work very, very hard because they're extremely motivated. And certainly, even from childhood, learning your own native language, children are motivated to learn to get their basic needs met. So I think one of the things children that may have that's a little bit different than adults is they have extreme motivation. But many of our ENGin students are also really highly motivated. I know that my learner is. But another big benefit that children have, and this is in particular with spoken language, is they have what I call the mother at their shoulder. Could be a mother, could be father, anybody. But they have people around them, especially learning their native language, who are constantly and gently correcting them and helping them to improve their spoken language. This is an invaluable asset in learning to speak a language. And so I think if we start to think of our role in ENGin a little bit as serving as the mother at the shoulder, um, that we can be particularly effective in what we're doing. So let me talk a little bit about what I mean by that. So we could advance the slide. Yeah. So think of, and some of you have probably gone over some of the training videos available at ENGin, and these are helpful. Um, And if you think about it in this context of mother at the shoulder, you can sort of see that they're talking about a similar concept. Um, One of the really helpful ways of reinforcing language learning is not necessarily always stopping the student and say, wait, you did this wrong, but to just repeat a phrase that they might have not structured correctly, repeat it back to them using the correct grammar. So a typical dialogue might go, the student says to you, I go to store last weekend. And there's two problems there, right? They're using the present tense when they should be using the past tense, and also they're missing an article. I'm going to be talking more about this, but this is a really common problem that Ukrainian learners have, because in the Ukrainian language, they don't use articles. They don't use the and and you'll notice that in spite of that, they're often able to communicate reasonably well. I mean, certainly when you see that sentence, I go to store last weekend, as an English speaker, it isn't correct grammar, but you certainly understand what the person is saying. So the main purpose of communication is achieved there. But we're trying to gently improve their language and their grammar. So you might repeat back to them, "Oh, so you went to the store." You don't have to emphasize it like that, but you rephrase it in using the correct grammar. So you went to the store. How was it? And so that they are constantly hearing these little corrections in their ear, and it will start to become natural for them to use the past tense in the right context, to use the articles. Okay, let's advance. So I actually also believe, and this is again derived from my experience as a language learner, there is an art. It is an art, not a science, in correcting language students, because as I mentioned, you don't always want to stop the student cold and maybe make them feel bad about it. So these gentle corrections, such as the repetition, work quite well. But at times I do think it's necessary to stop a student to make a correction. And then the art of this is to learn how to do this judiciously, because if we are trying to do too many corrections, the student's going to become discouraged. So if every other thing they say, you're stopping them, stopping them, stopping them, obviously they're going to get discouraged. They can't get into the flow of a conversation, and that hurts the learning. But on the other hand, with too few corrections, the student will just be reinforcing speaking the wrong way and getting more entrenched with these errors. I always remember, I'm in my 60s. I remember taking piano lessons in my youth, and my teacher saying, Lisa, you keep playing this part of this piece the wrong way, and you are practicing doing it wrong. So when you go to perform it, how do you think you're going to play it? You're going to play it wrong, right? So we don't want them practicing their mistakes. And so really, this is the challenge for the mentor. You need to pick your battles. So when I started with my learner, I really focused initially on things that impeded comprehension. If he said a word and I couldn't understand it, so that to me was top priority. You've got to, kind of maybe stop in the track, figure out what he's trying to say, and then try to correct it. But as time is going on, I'm focusing on these smaller issues, such as the use of articles with my learner. All right. So there are some other aspects of sort of this mother at the shoulder approach. One of them I feel is encouragement. I mean, we all need encouragement, and I think it is important to compliment the student when they show improvement, or even to point out improvement that they themselves might not be noticing. Saying things like, wow, you're speaking so much more fluidly now. Or I'm noticing you're using the past tense, you're using the irregular verbs. That's just great. And look at the progress you're making. So encouragement is important, but also patience. And in particular with patience, I think it's really important to communicate to your learner that the purpose of the session is not primarily to communicate, but to learn to communicate better. Because when we all get to an intermediate level of language, um, we can all manage to communicate. And sometimes this involves what I'll call workarounds. So I had been studying French. I went to France. I'm at a service center. I'm trying to get air put in my tires, and I'm pronouncing the word tire wrong because it's PM, like pneumonia. But of course, where every other letter's silent in French, that one is not silent. But anyway, she couldn't understand me. So a workaround is an extreme one. I say, the thing that rolls on the car, the part of the car that rolls, you know. So that's a workaround. And when the focus of your conversation is communication, workarounds are great. But you don't want to encourage workarounds in your sessions with your learner, because it's better for them to take time out and often even look things up. And I know with my learner, this took a few months really, because he would always apologize. Oh, I'm sorry, I must look this up. And I think it was really important to tell him, no, don't apologize. You are learning, and I want you to I want you to look things up occasionally, because the point is to learn to communicate better. So at times that means you may slow your learner down. At times it means that you may really emphasize, please do take the time to look things up with a translator, because by doing so, they're going to learn to do things the right way, and they're going to be advancing in their knowledge of the language. So slowing things down sometimes, I think, and using patience and showing them, yeah, I have no problem. Take your time, look it up. That I think is also really an important aspect. All right, I think we can move. Yes. Okay. All right, some other ideas. Here's one. I've tried to find exercises online related to the student's interest and or their reason for learning English, which for most of our learners is to be able to use English in a work setting. So and in particular, I'm an economist. I was paired with a young man who has a master's in finance, and he's going into the business world. So in many cases, I've tried to construct some exercises using articles online that have that talk about financial issues. So there were recent bank failures in the USA, and I showed him an article about this, and then that helps also to build the relevant vocabulary, because I can teach him some of the financial market jargon that he might encounter in his work. So trying to build on their interests and their needs in terms of how they're going to use English is also very helpful, I think. All right. Okay, so I had mentioned before a big challenge for our learners, because they come from the Ukrainian language, is to encourage the use of articles. And this is one that I'm still, working on with my learner. And here's one example of an exercise that I think was actually useful, and it was actually pretty tough for him the first time we did this type of exercise, but it's getting a little easier, and that's the point. And that is to take an article, ideally that your student would be interested in, but it doesn't really matter. Any article will do. Strip out all the a, and thus, and have your student try to figure out where to put them back in. So let's go ahead to the next slide, and you can see an example of this. So, here we go. Horse knows when he is going to race. So I actually the first time did this exercise with my learner very slowly. We would just do in one session one paragraph, because I would have him read it without the articles in English, and then go back and talk about, okay, where are the articles? Are there articles missing? Where are they missing? Which article goes here? And as I mentioned, and I wouldn't do this for the whole hour. So for me, this kind of grammar exercise is at most 20 minutes, sometimes even 10 minutes. I would say sometimes it could go as long as 30 minutes, but usually I aim to keep it in the range of 10 to 20 minutes. So because it's kind of exhausting, but we might spend 10 to 20 minutes going through one of these paragraphs, and then as he adds in the article, I would add it in red, save the document, then you can later email it to them just to use to reinforce the practice. But this type of exercise, I think, is really helpful, causes them to slow down, causes them to think about where articles go, how we use them. And so I think it's a really nice addition. So usually, we'll start a session with maybe 10 minutes or 15 minutes of talking. How was your week? What's new? And then we'll do an exercise like this, and then we'll finish up just with conversation again. But, anytime we do an exercise, then the subsequent conversation, you try to emphasize whatever you were just working on. So if it's articles, then we might try to finish up the day just trying to, use general conversation, but make sure that we have our articles. All right. Another type of exercise, you could do really something very similar. When you want them to practice the past tense or the future tense, take an article in the present tense and ask them to change it fully into the future or fully into the past. And again, you can go sentence by sentence there. It is kind of hard work for them, but again, it's a good exercise in that it really gets them thinking about it. The other thing is sometimes it's great to just pull random articles off the internet, because they always include vocabulary that the student might not be familiar with. And so as you go through it, you can discuss the vocabulary as well. And sometimes just doing it randomly actually makes it better, because it might include vocabulary that I would never have thought, or it might include a slang or something like that, that I might not have thought of introducing in the class, but it might be something that comes up often in English. All right, we can go to the next. Okay, and then, sometimes the review element in your class could be really, really basic. So early on, my learner was struggling a little bit with irregular past tense verb conjugation. And so just a simple exercise like this can be, he has to change bring into brought, hear into heard. And again, it's just an opportunity to practice the right way, right? And then later on, I did notice that after doing some of these exercises, it was much more common that I started hearing these past irregular verbs in the conversation, and that made me, feel very good about that. So we can, yes. So, there are so many resources online. We don't have to really reinvent the wheel here too much. One of the ones that I wanted to mention is that the BBC has a great series on learning English at the intermediate level. They've got some nice little interactive exercises that you can do. And again, those may only take 5 minutes, sometimes 10 minutes, but they can be very helpful. But in the end, and I'm after my own struggles, I'm really very much convinced of this. Learning to speak a language. Now, this is different than read, write, all of that, which you can do with textbooks and traditional learning methods. Spoken language is learning by doing. There is just no substitute for putting in the hours to gain proficiency in speaking a language. And that is really the important role of ENGin, because we are helping these students put in those hours. And as they do, they are gaining the proficiency in the language and the fluency, the fluidity, the ability to speak without gaps or pauses. And there's just no substitute for learning by doing here. But I do encourage my learner to immerse himself in the language in other ways. When I was trying to gain proficiency in French, I was in the United States, but I really tried as much as I could to use the internet and other resources to immerse myself in the language. And immersion, really, you can talk about, is up to 4 hours a day, because you can do different types of activities. Certainly, reading is important. My student is currently reading the Harry Potter series, which is a lot of fun. He's about the age of my own two sons. And of course, they adored Harry Potter when that series came out. And my learner has seen the movies. And so now he's reading the books, and that's a lot of fun. You can encourage them also to highlight in the book anything, phrase, or anything that they don't understand, and then bring it to the class. Watching TV. How many times have you heard people say they learn to speak English by watching Friends? But it's really true. You can, once you get to the intermediate level, you really can benefit uh, by watching TV. And sometimes you're able to put the English subtitles in while you're watching in English, and then you can pick up some words that maybe you weren't sure about as you listen. Podcasts. I'm a huge fan of podcasts. Why? Because part of the challenge is also learning comprehension. Can you understand English speakers when they are speaking at a rapid pace? And podcasts really are a great way to improve comprehension. And these kind of podcasts for learning are available at the intermediate and even beginner language learner level as well. So you can find podcasts that go at a slower pace with more simple vocabulary. Um, and these, I think, are just essential. So between the classes, reading, watching TV, listening to podcasts, using language learning apps, there are so many activities, different activities that you can do. And when you do all of these, it sums to really a type of immersion that is really very helpful for learning spoken language. All right. But finally, I think this is important too. Don't forget to have fun. I think for me, this has been easy because, for me, learning French was never really a purely academic exercise. I was doing it for fun. I was doing it to learn to speak with people and learn about the culture. And so for me, it's always been a joyful activity. It doesn't have to be drudgery. It can be a great way to share cultures. I know I've talked so much with my learner about different foods, about cultural celebrations, uh, about the local weather, everything that you can learn. And I've learned a lot about Ukraine through these activities, and I think my learners learned a lot about the USA. And then finally, just to remember that this program is also a way of showing support and solidarity with Ukraine. I know that's why you are all here, and I really thank you for that, because it's so heartbreaking what's happened there and what our learners are going through. And it's so amazing to me that they have the resilience. I mean, my student shows up every single week on time with a smile on his face, ready to go. And I'm so impressed with that. But I think you showing up is your way of showing support and solidarity with Ukraine so that your learner is not alone in the world, and they know that people are out there that care about him or her. So I think we have this rare opportunity to do more than one thing at once here. And I find that that is particularly wonderful and important.